When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million. This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here. This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things like free childcare, cleaner streets, and safer neighborhoods. As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
Let's be real for a second. Something feels off with the direction New York City is heading right now. And if you've been paying attention, you can see it. We got Mayor Zohran Mamdani rolling out another round of proposals. And from my perspective, these aren't the kind of policies that make a city stronger or more affordable to live in. They sound good on paper, especially when you hear phrases like tax the rich type of phrase. But when you actually stop and think about how this plays out in real life, it raises some serious questions because not that long ago, politicians built their campaigns around lowering taxes and making cities more competitive. Now we're seeing a shift where raising taxes is being framed as the solution as long as it's aimed at people who are considered rich enough. And on the surface, I get why that message connects with people. If someone has a $5 million second home, it's easy to assume they can just absorb higher taxes without it affecting anything else. But here's what that actually looks like in the real world. People with that level of wealth usually have options. They're not locked into one city. They can move their primary residence, shift their investments, or simply choose to spend less time and money in places that keep increasing the cost of staying there. And that's where this starts to matter for everyone else, not just the top earners. Because when the highest taxpayers begin to leave, even gradually, the city doesn't just lose a headline number, it loses a big chunk of its revenue base. And that gap doesn't just disappear, it gets filled somewhere else. That's the part that doesn't always get talked about. Mayor Mamdani's proposal specifically targets secondary homes above a certain value, positioning it as a way to generate more revenue from people who can afford it. But from my perspective, the bigger question is whether that strategy actually helps revenue in the city long term or quietly pushes it out. And what makes this even more interesting is that this approach isn't happening in a vacuum. We're also seeing support for these kinds of ideas at the state level, which signals that this isn't just one policy, it's part of a broader direction. So the real question we should be asking is simple. When policies are designed to target a specific group, do they actually stay contained to that group? Or do the effects spread out further than people expect? Because if history and other cities are any indication, the answer isn't as straightforward as it sounds. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out.
We are working together with the governor to introduce New York City's first ever pied-à-terre tax, which will... This is a tax on properties worth more than $5 million that are owned by people who do not reside in New York City. The super wealthy who can purchase properties and use them to store their wealth to benefit from New York City's real estate market, but not have to pay back into that same city that generates so much of that wealth in the way that they should. And that idea of a fairer society is at the principle of all of this advocacy, because what we are talking about is a recognition of the inequality that has permeated politics through the 5 boroughs of our city, through our country, through the world. For all of the discussion of the imagined exodus that would take place were we to tax the wealthiest New Yorkers by the appropriate amount, I say imagined because Before I was a mayor, I was a state legislator, and I was part of an effort to increase taxes on millionaires at that time. We were told the same thing then. And what we find now is that we have more millionaires today than we did at that time, even after having passed that tax. And so for all of that conversation about this imagined exodus, we have to reckon with the very real exodus that we are seeing in the city. An exodus of working class people, an exodus of those who cannot afford to live here. Yesterday, I was standing in front of, I think it's 220 Central Park West. Ken Griffin owns a penthouse that he bought, I think, for $228 million, north of $200 million. This is the kind of wealth that is being stored in the city. And it is a residence that is so often empty. And it was actually not that many years ago when a developer told the state senator, Liz Kruger, who represents that district, about a new building to come up. And he said, don't worry, no one's actually going to live here, so it won't have an impact on the need for city services. That's the way it's been built in to our city's life and its expectation. And now is the opportunity to change so much.
Does it come off as pocket watching as much, family? He knows a lot about how much things cost and how much they're willing to pay of their own monies. And it also begs the question, and I want you guys to let me know down in the comments, if someone works that hard with their hard-earned money and they decide to have a building they pay for and they follow all the legal processes, if they decide to leave it vacant and empty and do what they please with it, is it really a problem? Give you an example. Uber, for instance, started up in 2008. The founders couldn't get a taxi. They couldn't held down a taxi in Paris. They found it a hard time to get a taxi. So they thought, obviously, what most successful businesses do, they actually have a solution to a problem, which was they wanted to make sure they get an efficient service, a chauffeur, private chauffeur services where individuals can get where they need to get and mine through the city out in Paris. And then they won't have issues worrying about how to find or get a taxi in the due time to where they're trying to get what they're trying to get. So Uber was founded with the idea in 2008, started in Paris. 2010, the birthplace was San Francisco. And then eventually he started the business out. The founder and co-founder, they started out with $200,000 to $20,000 to $250,000 of their own money. Then he actually asked for investors. Jeff Bezos invested, a lot of well-known profitable, wealthy people who believed in the idea, which then served as a solution. And then throughout the rest of the 40 countries, you have Uber expanding as far as they did. But not to mention that Uber was being fought by San Francisco because Uber was basically being threatened to shut down because originally the name was Uber Cab, not Uber, because the city was so engulfed in Uber taking over their transportation services and their city services for transportation, overriding the money they would get from the city, even though Uber will pay their taxes just like a typical company would do based on whatever state they're operating in that business, right? So now they had to drop because there was so many legal processes as the company was getting off the ground before they asked for investors like Jeff Bezos. And that's why they had to eventually look for investors to believe in what they're doing and with endorsements and stuff to get more capitals, more monies, because they were being fought left and right in San Francisco from the court system because their name was Uber Cab. So they had to drop the name Cab for Uber to continue to expand because they got hit with fines and a potential to shut down. But they still believed in their hard-earned business, and now Uber is the way it is. And I say all that to say, well, what is the difference with him mentioning Ken, whoever his last name is, with the $220 million valuation or whatever pocket watching monies he's looking at in regards to someone using their hard-earned money to get what they worked hard for? Isn't that the beauty of America in regards you work hard for what you get and you get what you work hard for, and whatever you have, you worked hard to get it, which was the beauty of it with so many opportunities and privileges in this beautiful country of the United States of America. But it begs the question, is it right for you to sit there and continue to pocket watch someone's hard-earned money and they have to fund whatever you decide to fund and you continue to raise the cost on them because you see that they're making more money? Because if it was the flip side and it was Zohran Mamdani business, how would he feel when he put his grit, his might? Because it takes a lot of hard work, sleepless nights to run a business, build a brand, and everything else like that. For example, like Uber. Is that fair? Instead of inspiring individuals to brainstorm and get ideas and be innovative, to also have solutions or be solution based to end up giving a service so they can prosper as well. That could be anything from blue collar jobs, right? Painters, electricians, and continue to evolve and have a skill instead of worrying about, oh, I'm gonna take for an individual who actually worked hard and actually ingrained years and years of improving their craft. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments.
Mayor Zohran Mamdani announcing this weekend the city will open its first city-owned grocery store in East Harlem. Mamdani says the inaugural store will be located in La Marqueta, a marketplace under the train tracks running over Park Avenue. The National News Desk, Jeff Harris, joining us. And as you know, this was a cornerstone, Jeff, of Mamdani's mayoral campaign, creating a network of city-owned grocery stores. Break down what we're learning tonight.
So Mamdani revealing the plan while celebrating his first 100 days in office. The mayor declaring that all 5 of his city-owned grocery stores will be open by the time his first term ends, which isn't until 2029. The stores are intended to operate without a profit motive and would be exempt from rent and property taxes. Now, those savings would then be passed on to customers to make basic items like eggs and bread more affordable. But the New York Times reporting the first store, which is set to open in 2027, will cost around $30 million, nearly half of the $70 million he proposed from the 5-store program.
Stores where prices are fair, where workers are treated with dignity, and where New Yorkers can actually afford to shop. At our stores, eggs will be cheaper, bread will be cheaper. Grocery shopping will no longer be an unsolvable equation.
Multiple Republican lawmakers responding to Mamdani's announcement. That includes Utah Senator Mike Lee writing on social media, quote, "Government-run grocery stores. What could go wrong?" Now, Mamdani's announcement also comes just months after the city's comptroller revealed the city faces a $2.2 billion budget shortfall for 2026 this year, plus an increase in bus and subway fares by 10 cents, despite Mamdani saying he wants to make routes free.
Let's be real for a second. A lot of these policies sound simple on the surface, but the reality underneath is a lot more complicated than people want to admit. When you hear something like, just tax the rich more, it feels straightforward. But from my perspective, the issue isn't that New York City hasn't taxed enough. It's that the overall cost structure of the city is already extremely high. And a big part of that comes from a big part of that comes from layers of taxes, regulations, and spending decisions that all stack on top of each other. Not lawyers. Sorry, family. Think about what this actually looks like in real life. If you're running a business in New York City, you're dealing with high taxes, strict regulations, high labor costs, and expensive real estate. That doesn't just stay contained at the business level. Those costs get passed down. Prices go up, rent goes up, and everyday people end up feeling it. Because the cost also goes to individuals like everyday people in New York who have to pay the price as well. That's part of why so many residents say the city feels less affordable than it used to, even for middle income households. Now add another layer, like targeting second homes over a certain value. On paper, it sounds like it only affects a small group, but here's where it doesn't add up. People with that level of wealth tend to be the most mobile. They can change residency, move around investments, or shift where they spend their money. When that happens, and that's the freedom of America, right? The beauty of it. You having money and resources and investments gives you more flexibility where you don't have to feel restrained to anything because you can pick up and go elsewhere. So when that happens, the expected revenue doesn't always come in the way policymakers predict. And where there's a shortfall, the pressure doesn't disappear, it shifts. Because if the wealthy left because they have money to get up and go where they please, the people who can't suffer. And they pay the price that was supposed to be taxing the rich. At the same time, we're seeing proposals for more government-run programs like city-owned grocery stores. You guys heard it in the clip, right? From my perspective, that raises a different set of questions. The idea is to make food more affordable, which is a real concern in many neighborhoods. But when the city steps in to run something like a grocery store, you have to ask how efficient that will actually be and what it will cost long term. There's talk of tens of millions of dollars just to get the grocery stores off the ground. Think about that in practical terms. That funding has to come from somewhere. And if the operation isn't efficient or being able to be upkept or sustainable, it can turn into an ongoing expense rather than a one-time solution. We've seen similar efforts in other cities where the intention was to help, but the execution struggled with higher costs and limited impact. See, you can always have a good intention, but that doesn't mean when it comes to executing or taking action that it lands the way that the intention was to believe to be. For example, you may think that you are just communicating to somebody and being straightforward and blunt with them, but it comes across to them as they are being critiqued or belittled. So the delivery may have been intentionally good, but the impact and how it's coming across didn't seem receptive or easy receivable to the other person, which is just a misunderstanding. And that's just talking it through for clarity to get understanding, seeking understanding first, and then executing and making the adjustments. But it's different here because the adjustments just raises more questions. That's why we're having a conversation. But it seems hardcore, stable, stamped. Ain't nobody going to change my mind. I'm not looking for feedback because this is what it is. And that's why I'm saying, to be fair, on the argument on the other side is that these kinds of programs are meant to fill gaps where the private market hasn't delivered, especially underserved areas. That's a real issue. But the bigger question is whether adding more government control or more spending actually fixes the root problem or just adds another layer of cost to a system that's already expensive, right? Because at the end of the day, none of this exists in isolation. Taxes, regulations, and public spending all connect together. So you can't have a one-sided concrete stand for taxing the rich, but not get the feedback to see how it's impacting others. Even though your intent may be good, but at the end of the day, the reality is, what is the results really showing? Goes back to my example of having a conversation that may be full of misunderstandings, where instead of talking out in clarity and getting feedback and making sure and ensuring understanding is taking place to make sure things go in the right direction, if you're hardcore concrete on what you continue to come across as, then you're operating as ignorance because you don't want to hear no feedback because you believe you have all the answers, which raises more questions, which all angles of the conversation can be valid. But we have to speak in truth and conviction to really get the results that you intended to do so. And this is where it raises questions where taxes, regulations, and public spending are all connected. And when those costs rise, they don't stay in one place. They move through the system. And that's what this actually looks like for people trying to live, work, and build a life in a city like New York.
Welcome back to Takeout. New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani has been in office more than 100 days. His unlikely relationship, pretty good with President Trump until, well, just a social media post ago, I'll get to that in a second, is kind of one way or another defining the Democratic Socialist time in office. Here is how the mayor described that dynamic, Mamdani and Trump, on CBS Mornings. Please listen.
I would say the two of us are in touch. We've had a number of meetings now in the Oval Office, and we are honest, direct about the fact that we have many disagreements. There is one place of agreement that we have, which is that we both love New York City. And that's, I think, something that is at the heart of every conversation we have. It's how can we make this city better? Because both of us have said publicly that the better the city does, the better we feel.
Well, on that topic, let me read a social media post from the president seconds ago. Sadly, Mayor Mamdani is destroying, that's all caps, New York. It has no chance, exclamation mark. The United States of America should not contribute to its failure. Will only get worse. That's also in caps. The tax policies are so wrong. I stopped talking about all the all caps. People are fleeing. They must change their ways and fast. On and on. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay, Harrison Fields is.
Let's stop right there because it also feels like Zohran Mamdani is trying to make it like him and President Donald J. Trump relationship is closer than we know. And it seems to me, and let me know, family, that Zohran Mamdani is using Donald Trump name as a marketing tactic to make it as though they're having close buddy conversations more than we know behind the scenes, but also, oh, I'm in contact with Donald Trump, so he knows what I got going on, and we have more agreement than actually disagreement. But the question raises, is having a conversation, do you really think with everything with Iran and everything Trump is doing, trying to basically continue to make sure the safety, the national security with Iran and, nuclear bombs and uranium and things like that. Do you really think President Trump having all these things going on at once have time to keep talking to Zohran Mamdani? If anything, he might be left on voicemail and just sending voicemails because it seems though he keeps playing off of that one initial meeting as Donald Trump gave him a chance to hear him out when he first got elected very, very in the beginning of the year. And it's like he's been using that opportunity that he did when he went down to speak to President Donald Trump at the White House as a way to continue to stretch out for marketing tech to say, oh yeah, we're in close relationships. We actually are in agreement in a lot of things, and we talk regularly. And I talk to the president. Well, how many times and how much you talk to the president, and why is it still based on that same conversation about how much y'all agreed and disagree? But that doesn't mean that everything he's doing, he's following along when he has a whole country to lead, and the whole country as a chief and commander to continue to preserve and make sure that it's American first and dealing with making sure we go in the right direction and staying on the right side of history, undoing a lot of things that have been done for plenty of years in the next 3 years, because it's been a year since President Donald J. Trump presidency so far, and a lot has been done. I believe the most transparent, most fast acting president, and the most have been done in a year than any other president. But let's be real for a second. The idea behind these city-run grocery stores is simple. Lower costs by cutting out things like rent and property taxes, then pass those savings on to customers. On paper, that sounds like it could help people who are struggling with high food prices. And to be fair, affordability is a real issue in parts of New York City. But here's what this actually looks like when you slow it down. The first store isn't expected to open until 2027, and it's projected to cost around $30 million. That's just one location. Think about that for a second. In the private sector, grocery chains open stores all the time, and they do it at a scale and a cost that's driven by competition and efficiency. And to imagine $30 million. Do you really think that taxing the rich and the wealthy, are they going to make a small dent into really changing the outcome to solve a lot of these problems when it comes to everything that every state is trying to do, raising the taxes or trying to tax the rich who have the mobile ability to leave when they want to? And I want you guys to check out what Elon Musk said about that. So look, guys, it says, based on the reports from early 2026, Elon Musk has argued that taxing billionaires at 100% would barely dent the United States' roughly $38.8 trillion national debt. Musk contends that the federal debt is a structural problem driven by excess government spending, which he has described as socialist, quote unquote, in nature and a pathway to de facto bankruptcy. So as having a conversation, saying that taxing the rich won't solve the debt, then what makes you think keep spending and taxing the rich is really going to work? So mentioning that, right, and having a transparent conversation as we look at the facts, and that's from a wealthy individual. If that's just one location with the $30 million store, right? In the private sector, grocery chains open stores all the time. They do it at a scale and a cost that's driven by competition and efficiency. So when government steps in and spends that kind of money on a single store, it raises a basic question. Is this the most effective way to solve the problem of affordability, and let alone raising the national debt, which in turn causes more inflation and more things to be more expensive? From my perspective, this gets to a bigger issue about how public money is used and how outcomes are measured, is my point. Because that $30 million doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from taxpayers, directly or indirectly. And if the goal is to make groceries more affordable, you have to ask whether that same money could have been used in ways that create more access, more supply, or more competition instead of replacing it. Now, supporters of this approach would say the point is to step in where the market hasn't delivered, especially in neighborhoods that don't have enough grocery options. That's a fair concern. But this is where it doesn't fully add up. When a government enters the market and has advantages like tax exemptions or public funding, it can undercut private businesses. And if private stores start to struggle or close because they can't compete on those terms, you don't end up with more options. You can end up with fewer. Then the pressure shifts onto the government run store to carry more of the load of supply and demand. And that's where execution really matters. Running a grocery store at scale isn't simple. It depends on supply chains, inventory management, pricing, staffing, all things the private sector has spent decades optimizing, right? To maintain and reserve the food, to make sure it don't expire. Is no different from when it comes to grocery stores and restaurants. You know how much food they waste? You know how much food expire and they have to continue to restock shelves and put fresh food and fresh fruit out there? If those systems aren't as efficient on the public side, shortages, higher operating costs or inconsistent supply, things that get on products that, eventually have a recall because there was some type of lead or something, can become real risk. We've seen versions of this challenge before in different cities and programs where the intention was to help, but the results didn't fully match expectations. Now, I'm not saying every government-run program is guaranteed to fail. That wouldn't be accurate. But I am saying there's a pattern worth paying attention to when large, complex services are taken over or heavily managed by the government. The trade-offs matter. And from a broader perspective, this also connects back to the role of government that the founders debated. How much responsibility should sit with public institutions, versus private enterprise? And what happens when that balance shifts too far in one direction? At the same time, there's a political layer to all of this. Policies like these can take years to fully play out, and the results, good or bad, don't always show up immediately. That makes it harder for voters to connect decisions with outcomes in real time. And you're also seeing national attention around these kinds of local policies with different political figures weighing in and drawing their own conclusions. But setting politics aside for a second, the core issue is still the same. When a policy promises lower cost and better access, the real test is whether it delivers that in a sustainable way. And that's something people in New York are going to be watching closely over the next few years.
With me, and Democratic strategist and political contributor for CBS News, Chuck Rocha. Great to have you both here. Harrison, pick up on Trump and Mamdani and what we just heard.
Well, the mayor was being a little too cute by half with his videos about tax day, and it just reminded the president that while he's a smiling man, that he may be a cordial person to talk to in the Oval Office, he's destroying the greatest city known to man, New York City, where my family spent years, decades serving in the NYPD, and it's sad to see. But the good news for my home state of Florida is they're all coming to us. Look at the taxes. Look at safety.
But Governor Hochul said she's not going to allow him to raise taxes.
But look at the taxes over 20 years in New York.
Yeah, but he hasn't raised many new ones.
Democratic policies within the city.
Right.
His proposals, free childcare, free grocery stores, free buses, where is this money going to come from?
Grocery stores.
Fair. And it's going to take till 2030 for this thing to even open up. His policies are an empty bag. That he's over-promising. He is certainly under-delivering in the first 100 days. He can't even shovel snow in the city. You talk to New Yorkers there, and it's unfortunate. But it's unfortunate for the New Yorkers that cannot leave. For the rich New Yorkers that are leaving to my home state of Florida, it's fine. $20+ billion of capital is already flooding into Miami because New Yorkers are done with New York City. But for the people that cannot leave, it's a sad story.
Chuck?
Mamdani kind of swept into the office running against a flawed Democrat named Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, right. And he's made the most of it. And the one thing that I look at, a lot of folks like to pontificate on TV about all the tea leaves and stuff, but he had a lot of folks rallying around him. Democrats were looking for fresh energy, and I think they found him. Does everybody agree with all the Mamdani stuff that he's talking about with public policy? No, we're a big tent. There's a right and the left and the middle of the Democratic Party, but he's brought something that we've been looking for, and that's energy, especially after old Joe Biden. And after old Joe Biden, we were looking for somebody who had a little bit of spirit, and I think we found it here, and we're looking for other folks like that.
But one of the things he also said, he was like, well, they said democratic socialism cannot get elected in New York City. And he's trying to flirt with the idea of maybe running statewide, maybe bringing this to a national ticket.
He mentioned that in the CBS Mornings.
And I just don't think the country's there. I don't think it's there. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Democratic establishment does when they have a primary. Do they want to go Zohran route, or do they want to go more moderate? It's going to be a major test.
And when people say we've seen this before, there's a reason for that. A lot of these ideas, higher taxes aimed at a small group, more government-run services, bigger public spending to solve cost of living problems have been tried in different ways over time, and the results have been mixed at best. From my perspective, that history matters. It doesn't mean every new proposal is guaranteed to fail, but it does mean we should be asking harder questions before repeating the same approach and expecting a different outcome. Sorry, family, put it on the charger. Expecting a different outcome. Now, shifting over to the political side of this, you're also seeing more national figures start to weigh in on what's happening at the city level. President Trump, for example, has been more vocal recently. And from my point of view, it looks like he's creating some distance from policies and leadership styles that lean heavily in this direction. And I understand why that shift might be happening. In politics, there's always a balance between giving people an opportunity to lead and also recognizing when the results aren't lining up with expectations. Think about it in real world terms. Whether it's business, local government, or even your own workplace, people are often given a chance to prove their approach works. But over time, outcomes matter. If something consistently looks like it's created more problems than it solves, eventually, then that gets called out. At the same time, it's fair to acknowledge that leaders sometimes try to work across different viewpoints, especially when someone has strong support from certain groups of voters. That's part of how politics work. But this is where it all circles back to the bigger issue: results. Not messaging, not promises, results. Are policies making the city more affordable? Are they improving access to basic needs? Are they keeping businesses and residents invested in the community? Those are the questions that matter most. And those are the ones people are going to keep asking as these policies move forward or move from proposals into reality. And when you look at where the Democrat Party is today, from my perspective, a lot of the energy and direction is being driven by its more progressive wing. That doesn't mean every single voter or official falls into that category, but it does shape the kind of policies we're seeing in major cities like New York. And here's what this actually looks like in real life. Voters choose a direction based on the promises they hear, and then over time, those policies get put into place, and people start living with the results, good or bad. That's just how the system works. Now, one thing that has been happening over the past few years in movement, people leaving high cost cities and heading to places like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. You hear a lot of different reasons for that: lower taxes, fewer regulations, more space, lower cost of living. From my perspective, that raises an important question. If people are leaving places because they feel the policies aren't working for them, what happens when those same ideas follow them into new areas? That's something communities are starting to pay closer attention to, because at the end of the day, policies don't just exist on paper. They shape housing prices, job opportunities, business growth, and everyday affordability. And when people move, they bring their expectations about how things should be ran or run, and that could create tension, especially in regions that have built their economies around a different approach. Now, to be fair, people move for all kinds of reasons: family, jobs, lifestyle, not just politics. But when enough people point to the cost of living and economic pressure as a reason for leaving, it's worth taking seriously. And this is where all connects back to accountability. In a system like ours, voters have the power to choose leadership and direction, but that also means living with the outcomes of those choices over time. And what we're seeing now is a growing number of people paying closer attention to how these decisions actually play out in the real world, not just how they sound during a campaign.
That is going to be a fault line in the 2028 process, no doubt. Chuck, I want to ask you about Anna
And let's just finish up a little bit.
Paulina Luna's conversation with me about Ruben Gallego, Arizona.
We leave it there because now they're talking about a different matter. But a lot of this is heading toward a bigger question about where leadership like this goes next. From my perspective, it wouldn't be surprising to see Mayor Mamdani trying to take this statewide at some point, because that's usually how this works. Local policies become a launching point for bigger roles. And when that happens, the track record matters. People are going to look at what was promised, what was implemented, and what the actual results were. Now, I want to keep this grounded and respectful, because at the end of the day, this isn't about attacking individuals. It's about evaluating ideas and outcomes. But here's what this actually looks like in real life. Voters make decisions, policies get tested, and over time, the results become clear. Sometimes those lessons stick, sometimes they don't. And that's just the reality of politics in a big, diverse country. From my perspective, one of the challenges is that people can have short memories when it comes to policy outcomes. You see cycles where certain approaches gain momentum again, even after mixed results in the past. And that's why conversations like this matter, because they focus on what actually happens, not just what sounds good during a campaign. Now, on the national side, you're also seeing clear separation between different political approaches. President Trump, for example, has become more direct in criticizing policies like these. And from my point of view, that reflects a broader disagreement about the role of government, taxation, and economic strategy. At the same time, I understand why leaders sometimes try to engage across differences. In business and in politics, there's often an instinct to give people a chance and see how things play out. But eventually it comes back to results. If policies are increasing costs, pushing people or businesses away, or creating new challenges instead of solving existing ones, that's going to shape how leaders respond and how voters react. And this is where everything ties together. The decisions being made right now in cities like New York don't just stay local. They influence broader conversations about policy across the country. People are watching closely, not just for the headlines, but for the real world impact on affordability, opportunity, and quality of life. So at the end of the day, we're going to see how this plays out. The outcomes speak for themselves over time. From our perspective, the concern is that these policies may create more pressure than progress, but that's something voters and residents will ultimately judge based on what they experience day to day. Let me know what you think. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Peace.